Hi there, my name is Mara Gottschling, and I'm excited to report on my study of educator and student perceptions of subject area importance in the elementary curriculum. The purpose of this study is to explore and understand subject importance perceptions among elementary educators and students, and to use that understanding to adapt and improve elementary school curriculum as necessary. 3 research questions were proposed in this study. The first was, how do elementary educators and students rate the relative importance of common elementary subject areas? How do elementary educators and students differ when rating the relative importance of common elementary subject areas? And why do elementary educators and students view certain elementary subject areas as most or least important? There were 2 theories of educational psychology referenced throughout this presentation. The first is social cognitive theory, in which human agency drives decision-making, self-regulation, and motivation. This agency is based on a combination of internal personal factors, behavioral factors, and external environmental factors. The second theory was self-determination theory, in which people move back and forth between 3 stages of motivation. Amotivation, which is a complete absence of motivation. Extrinsic motivation, in which somebody is motivated by an external reward or approval, and intrinsic motivation, in which somebody is doing something for the inherent satisfaction of doing it. People are motivated to meet 3 basic needs, and that's where this motivation comes from. The first is autonomy, which is a sense of choice and internal approval of the choices made by someone. Competence, which is feeling effective and capable of achieving one's goals, and relatedness, in which connections with and care for other people who also express reciprocal connection and care are present in a person's life. Lots of literature was reviewed throughout the study, but a few key themes were clear. Among educators, it was clear that they typically view all or most subject areas as being important, but they generally view reading, writing, and math as the most important and spend the most time on those subjects. Among students, there was always interest displayed in non-required courses such as physical education, music, art, technology, and computers, even when it wasn't asked about. But students always suggested that they viewed math, science, reading, and writing as the most important subjects. A few studies focused on students with lower socioeconomic status or who were part of minority, racial, and ethnic groups. And other studies also tested for the effect of gender on subject area importance perceptions. Research found that students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and who were of minority races and ethnicities viewed math, science, reading, and writing as the most important subject areas to accomplishing their future goals. No statistically significant differences were found for gender. Limitations in the studies included small sample sizes and a lack of generalizability outside of the population being studied. Suggestions for future research included having other stakeholders be present, like having students in teacher studies and teachers in student studies, or asking administrators and parents as well, to expand the number of subject areas included in studies, and to explore the connections between motivation types and subject importance perceptions. There were some gaps present in the research. One was that research was conducted almost entirely outside of the United States. Only 1 study was found that was conducted within the United States. The majority of studies also asked for comparisons to other subjects, as in a ranking system, where only 1 subject could be considered the most important and only 1 could be considered the least important. A rating system in which multiple subjects could be designated as being important or very important was only present in 1 study. It's essential to study the views using a rating system and to consider them when implementing elementary curriculum, because asking teachers and students about their perceptions of curricular importance allows for better adaptations of an engagement with curricular materials. That benefits not just teachers and students, but also administrators, parents, school board members, policymakers, and more. This research study employs a convergent parallel mixed methods design in which data were collected together, analyzed separately, and then compared and integrated to draw conclusions. A purposive non-probability sampling method was employed, where participants were consciously sampled from groups meeting specified criteria. The quantitative instrument was the Elementary Music Education Survey by Hatch, which was a 7-point Likert type scale where participants rated subjects on a scale from very unimportant to very important. And the qualitative instrument was a series of open-ended response questions developed by the researcher. The procedure began with obtaining permission from building administrators and then recruiting participants with informed consent if they were an instructional staff member or the parent of a participating student, and then to collect informed assent from participating students. A practice survey was distributed to all participants to become familiar with Likert type scale questions and open-ended response questions using Google Forms. Then finally, the research survey was distributed. Data analysis began after all participants had completed the survey. Research participants fell into two groups: instructional staff members and fifth grade students. Instructional staff members included interested teachers, administrators, counselors, social workers, interventionists, or itinerant staff members. These positions were included because they needed to work with students in an instructional setting daily to qualify, which all of the previously listed positions do. Participants were drawn from 2 southeastern Michigan elementary schools, and there were 28 total participants in the instructional staff group. Fifth grade students were also drawn from fifth grade classes at the same 2 southeastern Michigan elementary schools as instructional staff participants. 51 total fifth grade students participated in the survey. Instructional staff members were asked 3 demographic questions at the opening of the survey. They were asked for their racial and ethnic background, their gender identity, and the duration of their career in education. When asked about race and ethnicity, 27 specified that they were white, not including Middle Eastern or Hispanic ethnicity, and 1 designated themselves as being Asian. 26 identified as female and 2 identified as male. When asked about career duration, 15 had 20 or more years of experience, 6 had 5 to 9 years of experience, 3 had 1 to 4 years, 2 had 10 to 14 years, and 2 had 15 to 19 years. Students were not asked in the survey about their demographic backgrounds, so information was taken from the district student services department regarding both schools. At school number 1, 10.4% of students received special education services, 81.3% received free or reduced lunch, and 50.4% were designated as LEP, which stands for Limited English Proficiency. 48.2% were female, and 51.8% were male. It's clear that the majority of students at this building were white, which included Middle Eastern ethnicity. Second was Asian, then Black, multiracial, and Hispanic Latino. 85% of students at school number 1 were designated as Section 31A at risk by the state of Michigan, which means they met a list of criteria which determined that they had unjust barriers to educational access. School number 2, 19.9% of students received special ed services, 75.2% received free and reduced lunch, and 47.7% were designated as having limited English proficiency. 44.4% of students were female, 55.6% of students were male. The majority race at this school was also white, including Middle Eastern ethnicity, but the second largest racial group was Black students, followed by Asian students, multiracial, Hispanic Latino, and American Indian or Alaska Native. At this building, 84.5% of students were designated as Section 31A at risk. No study is without threats to reliability and validity, and there were some attempts made to control for those factors. Chromebox alpha was calculated to assess reliability. In the original study where the instrument was developed, Chromebox alpha was 0.82. In the current study, Chromebox alpha was 0.7 in the instructional staff group and 0.83 in the fifth grade student group. For validity, all questions, quantitative and qualitative, were delivered to participants in the same wording and through the same medium. Multiple groups triangulation, in which instructional staff and students were separated into groups, was used for validity, and theory triangulation, in which social cognitive theory and self-determination theory were used to interpret and analyze data, were used to mitigate threats to validity. The Elementary Music Education Survey was also adapted to match the population being studied. Subjects that were not present in the elementary curriculum at these buildings were removed, and subjects that were present in these buildings but not in the original instrument were added. Descriptive statistics were calculated for each group, instructional staff and students. Mean, standard deviation, and standard error of the mean were calculated. Independent samples t-tests were run to compare student and instructional staff responses. For qualitative data analysis, thematic analysis was used, as was theory triangulation. As far as quantitative results were concerned, instructional staff members rated reading, math, and writing as the most important subjects. Art and music were rated as least important. Students rated math, physical education, and reading as the most important subjects, and music and media were least important. Staff members gave all subjects higher importance ratings than students. The mean score was always higher among staff participants than it was among student participants. Media, music, reading, STEM, social studies, and writing had statistically significant differences in subject importance views between instructional staff members and students based on having p-values of less than 0.005. Instructional staff members cited reading, writing, and math as being essential to students' daily lives, future employment, and societal participation. That is why they were chosen as most important. Students overwhelmingly believed that math was the most practically applicable subject taught in school, which is why they believed it was most important. Reading and writing were viewed the same way by fewer students, but for the same reasons as math. Allied arts courses were perceived as least important by both groups because they could be pursued outside of school, were talent and interest specific, and don't have much perceived real-world application. Most participants in both groups did not have any subjects to add to the elementary curriculum when asked. Discussion included restatement of the findings as well as interpretations of the findings. Teachers and students differed on certain subject areas, but it was clear that teachers typically viewed subjects as being more important than students did. But the reasons given and the findings generally matched those of previous studies. It was interesting to see how much lower students ranked subject importance than in previous studies, though. The largest conclusions reached were that core subjects were generally perceived as important. Allied arts courses perceptions were mixed, either considered to be important or not important at all, and reasons for subject importance ratings varied, but most were focused on subject applicability outside of traditional schooling. Limitations included a small sample size, a short timeline, anonymity of participants, which made it impossible to follow up on responses, population validity, as this was done at a large suburban school but could not be generalized to larger urban populations or smaller rural populations. Experimenter bias, since the study was only conducted by one researcher, and social desirability bias, because the researcher was also a colleague and a teacher of participants. Implications and suggestions for future research included conducting a similar study with a larger sample size and a longer timeline, gathering data on instructional staff education levels and seeing if there were any statistically significant differences based on instructional staff members' levels of education, separating instructional staff responses by gender and also students to see if any statistically significant differences were present, and to expand to different populations. If you're feeling like the little guy in the bottom right-hand corner, I understand. And I am very grateful you took the time to listen to this. Feel free to reach out with any additional questions. Thank you for your time.